a profoundly wealthy man, disguised himself as a lowly janitor within his own spectacular hotel. But the extraordinary sequence of events that ultimately brought him to his knees began with an anonymous, unstamped letter. Before Ethan Davis, the most powerful and ruthless figure in the Chicago hospitality industry, found himself scrubbing marble floors in the heart of the Windy City, he received a merciless note. It arrived in a completely ordinary envelope at the towering corporate headquarters of the Crown Imperial Hotel chain. There were absolutely no special wax seals, no golden corporate watermarks, and no return address, just a folded piece of plain paper filled with handwritten words that seemed to burn fiercely with suppressed, agonizing rage. The haunting letter boldly accused him of building a magnificent crystal palace and sitting comfortably at the very top, counting his endless fortunes, while the forgotten people beneath the gleaming glass bled merely to make his empire shine. It aggressively challenged his entire character, stating that if he possessed even a single drop of genuine courage, he would step down from his isolated throne and spend just one single day walking in the worn, tired shoes of those who held up his entire world. The writer promised that if he dared to look closely, he would discover that his magnificent empire smelled overwhelmingly of hidden tears and silent, unacknowledged suffering. Ethan carefully read the letter 3 distinct times, feeling a sudden rush of indignation, which slowly morphed into profound confusion, and finally settled into a deep, unshakable fear regarding a truth he had long chosen to ignore. He slowly dropped the crumpled paper onto his imported solid mahogany desk and stared out at the sprawling, bustling metropolis of Chicago through his massive floor-to-ceiling window. From that dizzying height, everything looked incredibly small, perfectly silent, and entirely controllable, with everyday people appearing as faceless, insignificant dots and towering buildings resembling mere pieces on a grand chessboard where he always emerged victorious. He had dedicated his entire adult life to building the Crown Imperial Hotel into a global symbol of absolute luxury, personally curating every high thread count linen, every signature lobby scent, and every soft musical note with a surgical, relentless obsession. Yet, the anonymous letter suggested a completely different, darker world existed within his very own walls, a world full of desperate voices he had never once bothered to hear. That very evening, Ethan ate his gourmet dinner in complete suffocating solitude, within his lavish multi-story penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. His grand dining table was large enough to comfortably seat 12 distinguished guests, but only one porcelain plate held any food, emphasizing the hollow reality of his personal life. The silence in the massive room was incredibly dense, allowing him to clearly hear the antique grandfather clock ticking away every single second of his profound loneliness. It served as a cold, mechanical reminder of everything he had selfishly sacrificed for his business, right up until his cell phone unexpectedly shattered the heavy quietness. The caller identification displayed the name of his estranged daughter, Lucy, the absolute only person on Earth who still held the emotional power to make the billionaire feel like a lost, helpless child. When she softly announced she was officially canceling their upcoming weekend dinner, Ethan instantly protested, reminding her with a hint of desperation that they had made a firm, unbreakable promise. Lucy let out a painful, incredibly hollow laugh, explaining that he had spent her entire childhood making empty, broken promises about attending her school piano recitals and spending quality time together. She coldly told him that every single promise he made was exactly like a bounced bank check, and she was entirely finished trying to cash them. The phone line went completely dead, without a single goodbye, or a standard expression of love, leaving Ethan listening to the empty, continuous tone that perfectly mirrored the current, desolate state of his personal existence. He held the expensive device against his ear for an immeasurable amount of time, before his weary eyes drifted back to the anonymous letter he had brought home from the corporate office. The handwritten aggressive accusations and his daughter's heartbreaking, honest words intertwined in his racing mind like two rushing rivers flowing into the exact same ocean of uncomfortable, undeniable realities. If he truly wanted to understand the broken foundation of his life, he needed to see the absolute truth with his own two eyes. In that defining moment of agonizing clarity, Ethan made a drastic decision that would permanently alter the trajectory of his existence and his vast business empire. He adamantly refused to send corporate auditors, hire external management consultants, or order internal human resources investigations from the comfortable, detached safety of his executive suite. Instead, he chose to physically descend from his ivory tower and step directly into the worn, painful shoes mentioned in the anonymous letter. He meticulously arranged for a fake background profile, extremely discreet employment documentation, and strict legally binding instructions that his true identity remain an absolute guarded secret. To the rest of the oblivious world, he completely ceased to be Ethan Davis, the untouchable billionaire, and instantly became Michael Evans, an ordinary, desperate man who needed a minimum wage job and had been assigned as a temporary cleaning assistant. He deliberately chose the flagship Chicago property, the very crown jewel of his portfolio, knowing that if corruption and misery existed, it would be hidden right under his nose. He swapped his tailored designer suits for a simple, scratchy uniform, mentally preparing himself to become entirely invisible. He was about to walk into the belly of the beast he had created, completely unaware of the devastating heartbreak waiting for him inside. The first thing that deeply shocked Ethan upon arriving at the Crown Imperial Hotel for his first shift was the depressing reality of the hidden service entrance, which stood in stark, depressing contrast to the luxurious main doors he usually used. It was a narrow, entirely undecorated, and claustrophobic corridor, smelling heavily of concentrated industrial chemicals, illuminated by harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights that gave everyone a sickly pallor. There he was introduced to Arthur, an elderly, soft-spoken janitor with deep, incredibly wise eyes, who welcomed him to the hidden grinding machinery of the Grand Chicago establishment. Arthur possessed the quiet, weary dignity of a man who had spent decades observing the absolute worst of human entitlement while remaining perfectly invisible. Arthur gently guided Michael through the labyrinthine concrete service hallways, patiently explaining the complex, unspoken rules of daily survival within the towering, unforgiving establishment. He handed over a set of heavily worn cleaning implements and a faded, scratchy uniform that had barely survived countless harsh trips through the industrial laundry machines. The older man spoke with the immense practiced patience of someone who had trained dozens of desperate, broken souls, emphasizing that their primary duty was to remain entirely unseen by the wealthy guests. He explicitly explained that they were considered necessary ghosts, expected to silently polish the Italian marble and vanish into the shadows before anyone noticed their breathing presence. The first few hours of his grueling shift served as a silent, painful demolition of everything Ethan thought he knew about his meticulously designed world-class property. Mopping the sprawling, intricate marble floors of the main lobby was not merely a simple matter of pushing a wet cloth around. It demanded immense physical endurance, strong back muscles, and precise practice technique. His arms ached fiercely, his lower back throbbed with sharp pain, and his aging body, far too accustomed to plush executive chairs and private luxury chauffeurs, loudly protested every single movement. Whenever he mistakenly thought a section was perfectly spotless, he would desperately discover soapy streaks that required immediate, exhausting, and repetitive correction. Arthur watched him struggle with quiet compassion and gently advised him to slow his frantic pace down, warning that rushing would leave highly noticeable marks on the pristine stone. He lowered his voice to a terrified, barely audible whisper, warning Michael that leaving any visible marks would quickly draw the unhinged wrath of Chloe Ellis, the ruthless general manager. Arthur explained that since the billionaire owner of the hotel never once bothered to walk these hidden corridors, Chloe operated as the supreme unchallenged law, holding the absolute power to hire fine and fire on a cruel whim. The revelation hit Ethan like a heavy invisible punch to the gut, making him realize his deliberate corporate absence had allowed a tyrant to take complete control. Shortly after the warning, Ethan caught his first lingering glimpse of Rachel Smith standing rigidly behind the grand custom-built mahogany reception desk. She was currently attending to an incredibly rude, finely dressed guest who was complaining loudly and aggressively about the supposedly inadequate view from his astronomically expensive suite. Despite the angry man's incredibly aggressive tone and condescending remarks about the intelligence of the hotel staff, Rachel maintained a flawless, professional smile that seemed painfully held in place by sheer superhuman willpower. She politely offered the angry man a complimentary upgrade to a panoramic corner suite, resolving the intense issue with astonishing grace and forced perfect politeness. The exact moment the rude guest turned his back and walked away, Ethan witnessed a subtle, heartbreaking transformation that left him entirely paralyzed with an unexpected wave of empathy. Rachel's bright, welcoming smile vanished instantly, rapidly replaced by a profound, ancient exhaustion that made her look like someone carrying the heavy weight of the entire world on her slender shoulders. However, before Ethan could fully process the deep sorrow pooling in her dark eyes, a sharp, piercing voice shattered his concentration and broke the moment. Chloe Ellis, the very general manager he had personally and proudly promoted years ago, appeared seemingly out of nowhere, demanding to know why the useless new janitor was standing around staring at the reception staff. Chloe coldly and aggressively ordered him to move his cart to the north corridor, immediately threatening that if she ever caught him idling again, he would be thrown out onto the freezing Chicago streets without pay. Without a single moment of hesitation or pride, Ethan bowed his head submissively and softly replied, "Yes, ma'am," entirely shocking himself to his very core. He, a powerful man who commanded thousands of employees across the entire nation, had instinctively submitted to her cruel authority simply because he was wearing a cheap janitor's uniform. As he pushed his heavy, squeaking cleaning cart away, he felt a fundamental, terrifying fracture in his rigid understanding of corporate power and basic human dignity. Pushing the heavy cart toward his next assigned sector, he briefly passed by the bustling reception desk once more, while Rachel was rapidly organizing a thick stack of printed registration documents. For a brief, fleeting second, their tired eyes met, and she offered him a small, genuinely warm smile that lacked any of the artificial, forced customer service polish she gave the guests. She quietly whispered a few brief words of solidarity and encouragement, promising him that the first few days were always the hardest part of the grueling job. That tiny, unexpected spark of human solidarity pulled an involuntary, genuine smile from Ethan, reminding him of a simple warmth he had not genuinely felt in several decades. The harsh lessons of his new reality continued when Ethan was assigned to clean the executive wing, the most opulent and heavily guarded section of the entire Chicago building. From a slightly open, heavy oak office door, Ethan accidentally overheard Chloe Ellis mercilessly berating a quiet, hard-working maintenance worker named Jacob. Jacob was desperately pleading for a shred of understanding, explaining that his elderly mother was severely ill, and he had already provided all the necessary medical documentation to excuse his brief, unavoidable absences. Chloe coldly and loudly dismissed his desperate pleas, stating that his pathetic personal tragedies did not pay the corporate payroll and violently threatening him with immediate termination if he missed another single minute of his shift. Throughout the incredibly long morning, Ethan realized with growing horror that Jacob's public humiliation was merely one tiny piece of a massive, terrifying pattern of systematic emotional abuse. In the bustling, sweltering main kitchen, he heard Chloe publicly shame a dedicated pastry cook named Harper for arriving just 3 minutes late due to a delayed city subway train. Later, down in the damp, windowless basement laundry room, he overheard two exhausted women, Penny and Sarah, whispering frantically about the sheer number of good, hard-working people who had quit that very month. They bitterly cursed the absentee owner, assuming he gleefully approved of Chloe's reign of terror while traveling the luxurious world on their stolen, hard-earned wages. Ethan desperately sought out Arthur during their incredibly brief unpaid afternoon lunch break, cornering the older man in the depressing break room and demanding to know exactly how Chloe maintained such an iron grip. Arthur sighed heavily and explained the elaborate, entirely illegal system of internal fines Chloe had quietly instituted, actively penalizing vulnerable workers for dropped towels, slight delays, or entirely unverified guest complaints. Whenever a group of brave employees had previously attempted to file a formal written grievance with corporate human resources, Chloe had somehow intercepted it and fired them all within the exact same week. The entire terrified staff had quickly learned that speaking up meant instantly losing their ability to feed their struggling families. Feeling physically ill and deeply ashamed, Ethan softly asked the most pressing question of all: why did Rachel, a woman of such obvious intelligence and grace, tolerate this ongoing nightmare? Arthur's eyes darkened with profound sorrow as he revealed that Rachel was a struggling single mother raising a sweet little boy named Benjamin, who suffered from a severe medical condition requiring incredibly expensive, specialized daily treatments. She desperately needed the comprehensive health insurance and the steady, reliable paycheck, making her the absolute perfect trapped victim for Chloe's continuous, cruel exploitation. Chloe knew perfectly well that Rachel could never afford to quit, and she maliciously used that agonizing vulnerability to keep the receptionist trapped in a vicious cycle of endless obedience. But the darkest, most shattering truth was yet to be spoken, and Ethan leaned in closer as Arthur's voice dropped to a barely audible, trembling whisper. Arthur revealed that Rachel's late husband, a brilliant and fiercely honest construction contractor named Ian, had worked on a massive, highly publicized renovation project within this very hotel. Ian had independently discovered severe safety violations and repeatedly warned his corporate supervisors that rushing the construction to meet the winter tourist season deadline would inevitably result in a catastrophic, deadly failure. His desperate documented warnings were entirely ignored by the corporate executives, who callously told him that he was easily replaceable if he refused to comply with their accelerated, dangerous schedule. Exactly 3 weeks after Ian filed his ignored, desperate safety reports, a massive structural collapse occurred on the active construction site, ending his life instantly beneath tons of rubble. The horrific accident left Rachel completely alone with a sick, crying child and mounting impossible medical debts that threatened to drown her completely. Ethan felt his breath catch painfully in his throat, a cold, terrified sweat breaking out across his forehead as he asked Arthur exactly which hotel property had claimed the young father's life. Arthur slowly turned his back, staring blankly at the peeling paint of the break room wall, and delivered the final devastating blow. Arthur stated with a trembling voice that Ian had died right here, crushed during the hurried, chaotic renovation of the Crown Imperial's very own North Wing. The realization crashed down upon Ethan with the devastating, unstoppable force of a falling skyscraper, stealing the air directly from his lungs and making his vision blur. He distinctly and vividly remembered signing the official executive memorandum that explicitly ordered the construction team to eliminate all non-essential safety protocols to ensure the grand opening happened before the lucrative holidays. His blind, arrogant obsession with profit margins and corporate efficiency had directly and undeniably caused the violent death of an honest, hard-working man. The sheer weight of his guilt was suffocating. Rachel was spending her exhausting days smiling at demanding strangers in the exact same building that served as her husband's tragic tomb. She was enduring daily emotional abuse to keep her sick son alive, entirely unaware that the very man responsible for destroying her perfect family was secretly mopping the floors just a few feet away. Ethan realized that every single tear she shed, every humiliation she suffered, and every ounce of pain she carried was directly tied to a signature he had carelessly scribbled on a piece of paper. He had completely destroyed her world, and now he was standing in the ruins, desperately needing to find a way to make it right. Ethan spent the entire night pacing the cold hardwood floors of his luxurious Chicago penthouse, utterly unable to banish Arthur's haunting, truthful words from his racing, guilty mind. He realized exactly why Chloe Ellis fiercely prohibited any photographs, biographies, or portraits of the corporate owner from being displayed anywhere near the employee operational areas. By intentionally keeping Ethan Davis as a faceless, abstract corporate entity, she successfully directed all the staff's natural fear and forced obedience strictly toward herself, ruling the hotel as an undisputed cruel dictator. His chronic wealthy negligence and singular obsession with the bottom line had provided her with the perfect dark environment to cultivate her absolute unchecked power. Determined to find the undeniable physical proof of her corruption, Ethan bravely volunteered to clean the executive administrative offices, while Chloe was attending a lengthy off-site meeting with external beverage suppliers. He slipped into her luxurious, overly decorated office, his heart pounding violently against his ribs, knowing that the security cameras were recording his every move, though they were rarely monitored in real time. He convincingly feigned mopping the hardwood floor, while his sharp eyes desperately scanned the room, eventually landing on a slightly ajar metal filing cabinet, tucked discreetly in the darkest corner. Inside the heavy drawer, he found a thick, dusty folder, boldly labeled with the exact dates of the North Wing construction disaster. His trembling hands carefully pulled out the official incident report, and what he saw made him feel physically sick to his stomach, confirming his absolute worst, darkest fears. Chloe had made extensive handwritten notes in the margins in bright red ink, explicitly ordering the legal team to completely delete the crucial section detailing Ian's ignored safety warnings. She had explicitly instructed them to frame the horrific tragedy as the sole, negligent fault of the deceased worker, and ordered the original truthful documents to be permanently and quietly destroyed. This was no longer just a tragic tale of corporate oversight. It was a deliberate, highly calculated federal crime committed solely to protect her lucrative promotion. Digging even deeper into the terrifying, damning folder, Ethan discovered Rachel's formal, heartbreaking application for corporate widows' financial compensation, a highly legitimate claim that would have easily covered all of her son's medical expenses. Across the very top of the detailed, tear-stained application, Chloe had aggressively stamped a massive denial and written a strict, cruel directive forbidding anyone from contacting the grieving widow. Ethan quickly pulled out his personal cell phone and meticulously photographed every single page, ensuring he captured the damning red ink perfectly before returning the files to their exact hiding place. He knew he finally possessed the heavy ammunition required to completely destroy the monster he had unknowingly created and empowered. Later that exact same afternoon, the fragile ecosystem of the hotel lobby was thrown into absolute chaos when Rachel received an emergency, terrifying phone call at the front desk. The pediatric clinic informed her that her fragile son had suffered a severe, unexpected reaction to his new medication, and they needed her physical presence immediately to authorize an emergency medical intervention. Panic radiating from every pore, Rachel frantically called Chloe's office, desperately begging for permission to leave her post just 2 hours early to save her child. Ethan watched in quiet horror as Rachel's face crumpled in complete defeat. Chloe had explicitly threatened to terminate her employment and cancel her health insurance if she abandoned the front desk. Knowing that losing her comprehensive health insurance would essentially be an immediate death sentence for her son, Rachel resigned herself to staying silent, tears streaming freely down her pale, exhausted cheeks. Without a second thought for his own disguise or the rules, Ethan marched directly behind the mahogany reception counter, firmly placed his hand over the telephone receiver, and told Rachel to leave the building immediately. He passionately promised her that he would personally handle any furious guests, answer any ringing phones, and absorb any terrifying consequences that Chloe might rain down upon them. Overcome with desperate, overwhelming gratitude, Rachel gave him a hurried crash course on the reservation computer system before sprinting out the glass doors toward the subway. For the next 2 hours, the billionaire owner of the Crown Imperial Hotel worked as a chaotic, entirely unpolished receptionist, discovering the immense, exhausting reality of frontline hospitality. He dealt with a furious businessman who screamed loudly about a missing laundry delivery and patiently assisted a bewildered new security guard named Marcus with programming access key cards. Ethan absorbed the relentless complaints, the unrealistic demands, and the sheer volume of stress with a newfound, profound respect for the incredible people who shielded his brand every single day. He realized that true luxury was not found in the imported Italian marble, but in the incredible patience of the underpaid workers who maintained the grand illusion. Just as his makeshift, stressful shift was finally nearing its end, the heavy brass doors pushed open, and Rachel returned tightly holding the hand of a small, incredibly pale boy. Benjamin clutched a worn backpack and a fistful of colorful crayons, looking around the grand, echoing lobby with wide, terrified eyes. Rachel exhaustedly explained that the clinic could not keep him overnight without a hefty cash deposit she did not possess, leaving her absolutely no choice but to bring him back to finish her shift. Recognizing her immense distress, Ethan immediately offered to take the young boy down to the employee break room and watch over him safely until she was officially relieved of duty. Sitting across from the little boy at the wobbly cafeteria table, Ethan found himself utterly captivated by Benjamin's incredibly gentle spirit and surprising, profound wisdom. The child quietly explained that his mother often cried alone in the bathroom when she thought he was sleeping, and that he planned to become a doctor so she would never have to worry about money again. Benjamin spoke of his late father with immense touching pride, describing him as a brave builder who made beautiful places for important people to visit. Every innocent word the boy spoke felt like a jagged, rusty knife, twisting violently inside Ethan's chest, amplifying his overwhelming guilt to an almost unbearable degree. Pushing a piece of scrap paper across the table, Benjamin proudly displayed a fresh drawing he had just completed with his stubby, worn crayons. The colorful picture depicted a small woman, a little boy, and a massive angel hovering above them, wearing a bright yellow construction hard hat and a joyful, protective smile. At the very bottom of the page, written in shaky, oversized letters, was a simple sentence stating that his brave father watched over them from the sky. Ethan had to quickly turn his head away and press his knuckles hard against his mouth to stop a violent, agonizing sob from escaping his throat. By the time Rachel finally arrived in the dim break room, exhausted and terrified of what Chloe might do to them, she found her son fast asleep, with his head resting peacefully on the table. Ethan was sitting silently beside him, standing guard over the fragile child like a fierce protective sentinel, having carefully gathered all the scattered crayons. Rachel whispered a profound, tearful thank you, freely admitting that absolutely nobody in the entire world had ever taken such a massive, selfless risk to help her broken family. Watching the frail woman carefully carry her sleeping son out into the freezing Chicago night, Ethan knew exactly what monumental actions needed to be taken the very next morning. The following day, Ethan was mopping the executive hallway when Chloe Ellis stormed out of her office and immediately backed him into a corner, her eyes blazing with highly suspicious fury. She coldly warned the lowly janitor that he was asking far too many questions, reminding him of a former employee named George, who had probed too deeply and found himself framed for theft. Arthur quickly appeared and attempted to pull Michael away, terrified that the cruel manager would completely destroy him, just as she had destroyed so many innocent others. Ethan remained remarkably calm, staring directly into Chloe's eyes, and assuring her that sometimes the quiet people sweeping the floors hold far more power than anyone could possibly imagine. In the quiet safety of the basement locker room, Arthur finally broke down, revealing a massive secret that shifted the entire landscape of the ongoing tragedy. He tearfully confessed that he was Ian's uncle, the very person who had painstakingly written the anonymous letter and the silent guardian who had spent years secretly copying Chloe's destroyed documents. He had orchestrated this entire elaborate trap, gambling everything on the desperate hope that the billionaire's enormous ego would eventually force him to investigate the accusations personally. Ethan looked at the weeping old man with profound respect, acknowledging that Arthur was the true brilliant mastermind who had finally forced a blind man to open his eyes. Ethan stepped outside into the cold alleyway and made a crucial, urgent phone call to his daughter Lucy, begging her to come to the hotel lobby immediately. He told her that he desperately needed her to meet the honorable man he was finally trying to become, promising her that this was the most important moment of his entire life. Meanwhile, he texted his elite corporate legal team, instructing them to freeze all of Chloe Ellis's access codes and prepare the federal termination papers immediately. The intricate game of hiding in the dark shadows was officially over. It was finally time for the true king to reclaim his ruined, corrupted castle and deliver justice. Ethan walked back into the lobby, his posture entirely different, no longer slouched like a defeated janitor, but standing tall with the commanding presence of an absolute emperor. He signaled for Arthur and Rachel to follow him, leading the highly confused employees straight toward the executive wing without a single word of explanation. Other employees, including Jacob Harper Penny and Sarah, noticed the strange procession and cautiously followed behind. Sensing that something monumental was about to happen, Ethan marched directly up to the heavy mahogany doors of the general manager's suite, took a deep breath, and prepared to dismantle the empire of lies that had caused so much suffering. Without knocking, Ethan violently pushed the heavy doors open, marching into the luxurious room and leaving the protective disguise of Michael Evans entirely behind forever. Chloe leapt to her feet, screaming into her telephone for the new security guard, Marcus, to immediately arrest the insolent trespassing cleaners. But the angry words died completely in her throat when Ethan finally spoke, using his true, booming, authoritative voice that commanded the attention of everyone in the room. The moment of absolute reckoning had finally arrived, and the entire staff watched in stunned silence as the lowly janitor prepared to completely destroy the untouchable tyrant. Using his true authoritative voice, Ethan introduced himself to the stunned room as Ethan Davis, the sole billionaire owner of the Crown Imperial Hotel. He aggressively slammed the printed photographs of her forged red-inked documents directly onto her pristine desk, watching all the color rapidly drain from her terrified face. He coldly and systematically dismantled her entire career in a matter of seconds, declaring her immediately terminated and informing her that Mr. Sterling from his elite legal team was already turning the evidence over to the authorities. Chloe's face turned the color of ash as she realized her reign of terror was permanently finished, and she scurried out of the office in absolute disgrace, stripped of all her stolen power. The heavy silence that followed her departure was deafening, as Ethan slowly turned to face the incredible damaged people he had deeply deceived. Rachel stared at him in sheer, unadulterated horror, realizing the kind stranger who had cared for her sick son was the exact same corporate monster responsible for her husband's brutal death. She angrily accused him of playing a sick, wealthy man's game, using their profound grief as an interactive theater to soothe his own guilty conscience. Before Ethan could offer his desperate, weeping apologies, his daughter Lucy stepped into the room, having witnessed the entire exchange from the open doorway. Lucy's young voice cut through the thick emotional tension with astonishing clarity as she looked at her powerful father and the crying employees. She told her father that if his immense wealth had caused these innocent people such deep sorrow, he owed them a massive debt that simple money could never possibly repay. Inspired by his daughter's profound wisdom and his own shattering guilt, Ethan called for a massive, unprecedented assembly of the entire hotel staff in the grand ballroom. He invited the housekeepers, cooks, guards, and clerks to sit in the velvet chairs, usually reserved exclusively for the wealthiest elite preparing to bear his soul. Standing before the massive crowd, Ethan publicly confessed his severe, deadly negligence and officially cleared Ian's name, declaring him a brave hero who had tried to save lives. He announced the immediate permanent dissolution of the punitive fine system, retroactively restored all stolen benefits, and implemented the strictest worker safety protocols in the entire country. Finally, he turned directly to Rachel and her son, promising a lifetime of full medical coverage and a comprehensive, fully funded educational trust to ensure Benjamin would indeed become a doctor. The atmosphere in the massive ballroom shifted from shock to overwhelming tearful joy as the invisible workforce finally realized they were no longer ghosts in their own building. Arthur wept openly in the back corner of the room, his long secret war for justice having finally reached a victorious and incredibly peaceful conclusion. Lucy approached her father, taking his trembling hand with a genuine proud smile, finally recognizing the honorable, accountable man she had spent her entire childhood waiting to meet. Ethan had completely lost the arrogant, flawless illusion of his pristine empire, but in the painful process, he had managed to fully salvage the very core of his human soul. He knew the road to true redemption was long, but for the first time in his life, he was walking in the right direction alongside the right people. Several months later, a beautifully polished bronze plaque was permanently installed in the bustling North Wing corridor of the Crown Imperial Hotel, forever honoring the profound courage and ultimate sacrifice of Ian Smith. Ethan Davis, no longer an absent billionaire but a deeply involved and compassionate leader, often stood quietly before that plaque, reflecting on the arduous journey that had completely reshaped his worldview. The staff no longer feared the executive offices, and Rachel flourished in her new role within the Human Resources Department, ensuring no employee was ever silenced again. The hotel truly became a place of warmth, not just for the paying guests, but for the dedicated family of workers who kept the lights shining brightly. The entire experience had served as a brutal but absolutely necessary awakening for Ethan, teaching him a lesson that transcended balance sheets and profit margins. It is a fundamental truth of life that the true measure of a person's lasting legacy is never found in the dizzying height of the glass towers they build, nor in the vastness of the wealth they manage to accumulate in silent bank accounts. True wealth and genuine character are fundamentally measured by the authentic respect, empathy, and care we actively show to the individuals who labor unseen in the shadows to maintain the very foundations of our success. It serves as a stark, vital reminder for all of us, especially as we advance in years and look back on our life's accumulated work, that ignoring the shared humanity of others inevitably destroys our own spirit. We must remain eternally vigilant against the cold seduction of absolute power and endless profit, ensuring that we never become so elevated in our own self-importance that we fail to hear the quiet, desperate struggles of those standing right beside us. When we finally choose to step down from our pedestals and walk in the shoes of others, we discover that compassion is the only true currency that holds any lasting value in this world.